Welcome to another episode of Spiral Theory, Understanding the Body Through the Forces of Nature. I'm your host, Sheila LeGroux. Let's start discovering. Welcome to Spiral Theory, Understanding the Body Through the Forces of Nature. This is episode number 3, and today we have our lovely guest, Delfina Bonilla-Lopez. She's a therapist here at Body Center St. Pete, but she is many other things and came from a rich history of personal trainer, mother of 2, all kinds of business. You've had businesses, you've studied. So we're going to talk about as much as we can get into this time. So welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
It's a treat to be here.
I love the sharer of information. We were just saying we're both sharers of information. So let's start sharing.
Okay.
So I want to start with your introduction to the world of the body. Like what started with the history of being a personal trainer and then how you got into neurosomatic therapy.
Yeah. I mean, even before all of that, I was a child who was just like a mover. I started walking much too early. I started walking about 6 months, and my parents like to joke that I didn't walk, I just ran. So I think that led to an entire childhood and youth filled with athletics. I was a figure skater for a really long time. I was a synchronized swimmer. I was a soccer player.
That's right. We share the synchronized swimming
Yes.
background.
all of those things I did at the same time. And in between, I played basketball. I had a lot of kids on my street, so we played street hockey. I dabbled in tennis. It wasn't my thing. But so I think that I had a life that was rich with movement anyways. Mm-hmm. And I liked it. It did many things for me. But after I graduated undergrad, in which I didn't study anything that had anything to do with movement or the human body, I studied musicology and Spanish literature because the language, especially Spanish language, and music are other passions of mine too that have also always been a part of my life. After I graduated from undergrad, it was a difficult time financially for everybody. We were in a period of recession, and I was trying to figure it out, trying to figure out transitioning from being an undergraduate student to all of a sudden needing to move into professional life. And so as I was working through that transition period, I started going back to exercising. And I noticed how much it changed me, even though I was moving through a difficult time in my life. And the people around me noticed how much it changed me. So naturally, I was like, how can I turn this into a career? And I went down the personal training path, and I did that for many years, and I loved it, and eventually incorporated yoga. But towards the end of that time, my favorite people to work with weren't the same people that were my favorites in the beginning.
Okay.
In the beginning, I really wanted to work with populations that were interested in tonifying and weight loss. And we did that, and it was great, and I was good at it, but eventually I got bored of it. And that's not to say it's a boring profession in any sense. It's just, some things in your life are stepping stones to the next thing, and that was for me. By the end of that time in my life, my favorite people to work with were people that wanted to exercise but had some sort of obstacle they needed to overcome, a physical obstacle. So those would be people who were like, I want to train, but I have knee pain. Mm-hmm. I want to do a pull-up, but I have shoulder pain. And so I wasn't a physical therapist, but I knew exercise, and I loved learning new exercise. I've always been a voracious reader and consumer of information. So, I just would continue to educate myself, and we figured things out. I got into things like foam rolling and using yoga tune-up therapy balls, and we figured it out.
Talk about stepping stone. I mean, this was the beginning of what you're doing now, basically.
That was the very beginning of it. Yeah. Eventually I took it. So in that time when I was a personal trainer, right at the beginning of it, I fell into a time in my life in which I had chronic chest pain, and that lasted for 10 years, to my chagrin. I did everything that I knew how to do. I saw everyone that I knew to see to try and address this issue, because there wasn't anything wrong with my heart, which was an initial concern. There wasn't anything in the tests or, related modalities that were showing something was wrong. So I was left in this place of literal physical stagnancy. Like I just didn't have movement in any direction. It wasn't worse. It wasn't better. It was just stagnant. And stagnancy in the body is not something that you want. So eventually I had a friend who was a yoga tune-up instructor that moved here to Clearwater to go to the Center for Neurosomatic Studies, which of course is the school where we learn the type of structural therapy that we practice, neurosomatic therapy. And Heather, my dear friend, who forever I'll owe her a debt of gratitude. She one day said to me, I need to work on someone who has chronic pain. I need to do it for school. We have this, 10-week program in which we need to basically run an experiment using the scientific method applied to our structural therapy work to see how we can affect change, either positive or negative, but how we can affect change with our practices. So I volunteered myself because I had nothing to lose. And why not? Free massage. As a breastfeeding mom at the time, all of us can use massages. So Heather worked on me maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times. And that 3rd or 4th time, I left and I drove home feeling like I had left a purse or a watch or a necklace, at the school. And I was trying to figure out what it was that I had left behind. And I just didn't know. But when you have chronic pain, you check in with yourself. You're a little bit neurotic, right? Because you're constantly trying to move away from that sensation. So I checked in with myself, and that sensation was gone. I was very wary. I was very trepidatious about having any celebration around that because I didn't want to get my hopes up falsely. But to my surprise, it didn't return. It didn't return 2 weeks later. It didn't return 6 weeks later. It didn't return at all.
That's amazing.
It was amazing because I think with anybody who struggles with their body in some physical capacity, there's this black cloud that comes over you. And when that is removed, you quite literally can think in ways that you were inhibited from thinking before. So for me, I knew I wanted to move forward into a new career, but I didn't know what. And it was like I had this invisible, what do you call it? It's like I had these invisible ties that were holding me down.
You were tethered.
Yeah, I was tethered. Exactly. I was energetically tethered. I was physically tethered. And when I didn't have to think about that, I remember, that little voice inside you that speaks to you, whatever that is, it kept asking me, what are you going to do now that you are not a victim to this anymore? And so I thought about a few different things. I took some time. I took like 6 months to figure out, my thoughts. But ultimately, it led me back to neurosomatic therapy. And it was a very synergistic process because I'd already worked with the body in other capacities. I'd already worked in the health space for a long time. And so it didn't feel foreign, even though it still felt new. And so that's how I ended up at the Center for Neurosomatic Studies.
Do you remember the what was being treated that really helped your chest pain?
I do. Yeah. I'll never forget that. I asked about it afterward. Heather treated one of my infrahyoids, which can send referred pain into the sternum. And that's what I was feeling. So I had gone to chiropractors and osteopaths and acupuncturists who, wanted to treat my chest, wanted to treat my back. And they were all well-meaning, but that just wasn't what was going on with me.
Yeah. I actually had the opportunity to see the attachments of the infrahyoids in dissection. And they go on the underside of the sternum. And I had no idea how inferior they really go down towards that heart area and that heart space. So we can't touch all of that, but we can touch the beginnings of it. And that treatment is pretty intense to kind of swipe your finger underneath the sternum and clavicle.
It was very intense. I'll never forget that feeling, but it was that attachment.
That's amazing.
On the clavicle and the sternum that ultimately was sending referred pain in there. I had an accident in which I fell and I broke one of my fingers. I broke my right ring finger. I fell and I drove it into the cement. And exactly 1 year later, after that accident, is when this chronic pain manifested. So I think I always knew that fall was somehow related, but I couldn't explain it,
Yeah.
Now that I've been through school, that I've mentored with you for so long, we've learned about fascial lines and fascial slings and all of these connections that in which like someone could have an accident in their appendicular, in their arm or their leg, and it could play out somewhere in their axial skeleton, like your head or your neck or your chest or your pelvis.
It's amazing. I mean, a lot of my clients will ask, like, why do you think this is here? And one of my things is maybe one of the falls when you were a kid. I mean, this stuff sticks around, that outstretched arm all the way through the chain. And, if it's not addressed, it potentially might not release on its own. And I just wonder how many of our clients are part of their problem is like a building of tension in the fascia from a fall from so long ago when we were young, playing around.
Yeah, because those things, when we're young and we're so plastic, we don't necessarily feel that in the moment, or that soreness goes away. But whatever trauma has been left there,
it starts a pattern.
It can start a pattern, and that can play out years and years later.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an incredible story. So you had a personal experience with getting help with neurosomatic to get you to kind of jump into this career. And years later, you ended up working at the Center for Neurosomatic Studies and TAing. And that's around the time when we met, and you started working here. And I said, "Oh, I have another layer of information I'd like you to work with." That was the beginnings of spiral theory.
That's right.
So how did that go for you? Like just graduating, having this entire system of working with charting, and then I throw you this like curveball, and on top of all that, there's this. How did that feel for you?
Yeah. Well, I have a really curious mind, and I think whether I'm a good one or not, I am a multitasker. So I often am juggling lots of different ideas in my head. So when I came here and started working for Body Center, and you began imprinting your knowledge of scoliosis and the beginnings of spiral theory onto me and onto those of us that would, lend our ear, that excited me a lot. I could see why it would be scary. But for me in that moment, it was very exciting. I think that I think when you learn something and you want to master it, you have lots of questions, and it can be so beneficial to pull from multiple places, right? And so the Center for Neurosomatic Studies gave me an incredible foundation, and I use all of those principles to this day. And because of you, I've layered spiral theory on top of that and other things as well. And I think it just allows you to refine your craft more and more, and refine your specific interests.
And the
more
questions, I felt like with neurosomatic therapy in the chart, there were still several questions I would have. Where is this force coming from?
Many questions.
Why is it like this? The why. And then when spiral theory started coming into focus, I felt like it was answering those questions.
I felt like it was too, when I would observe you treating people, hearing their stories, seeing them come back, hearing how they had changed or progressed after one treatment or multiple treatments. I think also because I have an exercise background and a movement background myself, coming here and seeing the importance you place on movement as part of someone's rehabilitative process, retraining process, I think that spoke to me in huge volumes, because that's always been what I've experienced. That's always been what I've seen as a part of someone's process in making change in their
Because
body.
humans aren't static.
We're not static.
We're taught at Center for Neurosomatic Studies static measurements. We're taught gait as well, learning how to analyze gait. But it was for me kind of flipping the static measurements into, okay, so what are you doing? What are you actually doing with your body? And then marrying the two bits of information to come up with a treatment plan, because the static measurements and then, wait, what are you doing? Can I see you do that? You might not see that in the static measurement. So it brings a lot more of the intake into life when we start watching someone move.
It's true. It gives so many more clues to our detective work.
Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely. I had someone walk in just yesterday talking about knee pain and that she doesn't feel it when she rides her bike or cycles. I think like serious cycling, like cycling classes.
Like spinning, yeah.
Spinning. Couldn't think of the word. Thank you. But absolutely feels it in what we would call more LISS, low intensity steady state exercises, walking of all things. So, of course, I needed to see her move. I needed to see her walk.
Yep.
And I had done all the static measurements.
Nothing
I had
was
done my
showing up.
spiral theory measurements. Things showed up, lots of good clues, but more things made sense more quickly as soon as I watched her walk.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like, you don't even need to see every single little thing. You just need a few things to put some puzzle pieces together.
And one of the cool things about neurosomatic therapy that I love about the program is the cranial work. So it's one of the things that sets neurosomatic therapy apart from traditional massage, I think, or a few of the things would be the cranial work, the atlas axis mobilization of C1 and C2, and the organ work. I feel like those three really set us apart from traditional massage. So in the work we've been doing lately, we've been seeing some interesting things with airways and cranial work. And you and I both have had, both personal and with clients, some interesting stories surrounding that. So we're diving into this as a more exploration, more learning, more sharing of information. So what's the journey that you've been taking with the cranial work, and what you're seeing in your own life with what's going on with the airways and all that stuff?
Life is so synergistic, and sometimes I don't see that until I'm looking backwards in my life. But I loved the cranial work when I did it in school, and admittedly, there were a number of years where I shied away from it. I was a little scared of it. You and I used to talk about that working on the foot
Yeah.
was a can of worms.
Can of worms.
And I felt that so much about the cranium. So I always did the work and I did it well. But I think my level of understanding has changed drastically, especially within the last couple of years, because of my son's experience with his airway. So I have a nearly 8-year-old son, and he had never struggled with ear infections. He had never had any symptoms of asthma, was always healthy as an ox until he was about 5 or so years old. I think we had a span of a couple of weeks in which he had 2 really bad ear infections back to back and asthma-like attacks. When they're that young, I think when they're under 8, they don't call it asthma. I think you get diagnosed at 8 or older.
Okay.
So they call it asthma-like symptoms. So he was having these asthma-like symptoms. We didn't know what to do, So finally we started using an inhaler, and that really, that allowed him to overcome this period of like 2 or 3 weeks of pretty serious illness. In addition to that short, intense time, my son had a really raspy voice. Really people would comment on it. People loved the sound of it. I didn't mind it,
Like
but
Janis Joplin.
Yeah, but I didn't know that it was a classic symptom of airway issues and or reflux issues. I didn't know that until we went to a holistic dentist, and he was like, oh yeah, cavities, raspy voice, airway stuff, like mouth breather. So it was at that same time that his teachers were saying to me, he's mouth breathing during class, he's chewing on everything, and he's having trouble with his short-term memory. He's having trouble retaining like letters, right? Which is the basis of learning how to read. So we were having these different puzzle pieces all at once. And I should say some hyperactivity, some attention deficit. We're having all of these symptoms at once. And being that he's our first child, we had no idea what we were working with. So of course we've gone down different rabbit holes, but we landed in this airway place because he was having trouble breathing, and we had some of these other puzzle pieces. So we started by, we started on this path because we had a really good holistic doctor to whom we were asking all these questions. And she said, have you tried myofunctional therapy? And I said, what is that? And I was already a therapist. I was already an NST. And so she explained to me that it's for people who are having trouble with their airway. It's a sort of physical therapy for the mouth, especially for people who exhibit like a tongue tie, a buccal tie, lip tie, and any of these, we'll call them like adhesion restrictions in the oral cavity that would affect how someone breathes, how someone swallows, and how someone uses their facial muscles in a general sense. That was a whole new world for me. We ended up working with a few different dentists, a few different sleep and breathing related practitioners. And we started by clearing the nasal cavity. So what I didn't know at the time, and this is kind of silly now that I know what I know, I didn't know that the mouth is for eating, talking, and drinking, and that the nose is for breathing and for smelling. Those were things that either I didn't grasp them in school or it just wasn't a huge focus for us. Mm-hmm. When I began to learn that you need to breathe through your nose and only your nose, and how different that process of receiving air and exchanging airflow is than through the mouth. I mean, we dove into it. So first and foremost, you can't use your nose to breathe if you don't have a clear path. So you have to clear the airway by cleaning it. So you can use a neti pot, or there's other tools that I think are a lot easier. And so we began doing that with our kid. So he does it. At that time, he did it every day, twice a day, when we were really, really struggling. And now he uses it a few times a week, kind of depending on the day. Last night.
Question, is that getting all the way into the nasal concha? Is that all the way back there, or is it really just the nasal passageway, like the nostril area?
I think it's mostly just the nasal passageway, because it'll pass from one nasal passage to the other, and then, back again when you work on the other side. Mm-hmm. So it's really just this area, But I would say cleaning that area is the first piece. The next piece is you have to have enough space for air to pass through, which is where some of our techniques can really help. Like we do the intranasal work, where we stick a pinky up your nose.
Or a balloon.
I usually just use my pinky, and we create space between these bones and decompress them so that someone can have more room to breathe, literally more room to breathe. These bones, they can get smashed because you fell, you played sports, or it could literally be that your bones grew, we'll call it crooked, or in our world, we call them distorted, because of the way that you used your facial muscles, your oral muscles while you were growing. I had no idea that was so important, but there's many books that talk about breath and breathing. One of the popular ones is Breathe, Breath.
I think it's Breathe.
It's Breathe.
By Nestor.
Right? By James Nestor.
Yes.
That's a wonderful starting point for understanding some of these really important pieces. But one thing that he brought to my attention that I wasn't aware of is the importance of eating hard foods and chewing on hard things, because that gives the body the pressures that it's looking for in order to grow, to actually grow the maxilla, actually grow the mandible.
And it's become very popular in social media as more of an aesthetic thing, interestingly.
Yeah, which is, go figure.
Well, attraction is this kind of primal innate thing that is, we're attracted to health. That's true. What attraction is. We're attracted to health.
It's true. So much of that is intrinsic and sort of inexplicable, right? But all of our senses can detect someone who exhibits signs of health and vitality and life force versus someone who isn't. For example, if you have, sort of black under the eyes and you're looking tired, right? Most people would understand that that's a sign of someone who's exhibiting exhaustion for whatever reason or something like that. In the same way, when you have a small mouth area, you don't have enough room for your teeth. And a lot of times, wider jaws are considered more aesthetically pleasing, more beautiful, right?
The chisel.
And
then there were techniques like mewing that have developed from this exact same concept.
Yeah. So that's one myofunctional or like physical therapy for your mouth. One myofunctional exercise that a person could do to build tongue strength. So like, why would you want to build tongue strength? The tongue does quite a few things, but one reason you need to build it is because in one of the other steps to being a nose breather is you must use your tongue to rest on the roof of your mouth so that you're blocking the mouth as a passage of air and sending the signal to your body to breathe through your nose. So that's one. You also have nerve endings from the vagus nerve there. So when your tongue is resting on the roof of your mouth, then you are signaling to your body rest and digest mode, which is the opposite of fight or flight. So to be in this relaxed nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system state, as opposed to in fight or flight state. So if
Great for a young child.
yeah,
right?
great, and great for anyone,
Anyone, of
because
course.
all of us exhibit so much stress. But of course, in his case, he was a mouth breather, so his tongue wasn't resting up there, and you know, that would have meant that he was constantly living in fight or flight. In addition to mouth breathing. So, you know, one of the other symptoms he was having was lots of cavities. And this is a child who eats really well. You know, we monitor sugar intake, veggie intake, all of that stuff, right? So it didn't make sense that we were struggling this much with cavities if I only looked at it from the perspective of what are you eating, right? But eventually I learned that when you mouth breathe, that contributes to acidifying the mouth, and too much. If you don't have the right balance of acid alkaline, then the quality of your saliva is too acidic. And so when the saliva should be sort of washing and flushing and cleaning and caring for your teeth, it's accidentally contributing to breaking things down because the acid alkaline balance is not in order.
And another thing that I've observed with my clients is if they are mouth breathing, their diaphragm's underperforming. And if the diaphragm's underperforming, then we are using more of our accessory breathing muscles, mostly in the neck, to pull in enough oxygen. And oftentimes you don't feel like you can pull in enough oxygen, and that's a very frustrating feeling. And then additionally, that tightness in the neck perpetuates the mouth breathing. So then you're just in a vicious cycle.
And then
it's
you're in a
just
vicious
looping,
cycle.
looping.
And I learned for myself too, and I'm still figuring out if this is kind of a general rule or not, but for myself, when I really work to stabilize the first third or 2/3 of my tongue on the roof of my mouth, my neck alignment completely changes. Like I'm much stronger, much more stable there. But something I read in a different book called The Breathing Cure basically said, and I didn't realize until I read that part, but it basically said that you cannot efficiently and effectively use your diaphragm as your primary breathing muscle if you're mouth breathing. You have to, it can only happen if you're nose breathing. I didn't realize that, but it makes a lot of sense.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
So we prioritize oxygen as human beings, like more so than food and water. So oxygen first. We will die with the least amount of time starved of oxygen than anything else. So this is like priority. This is priority for being alive. This turns into something extremely important. And initially I did a lot of intraoral work, working on people with snoring issues with great results. But this turns into something much bigger, especially when you're looking at young children. And I currently have a 20-something-year-old, not so young, but dealing with this same stuff. And he's been suggested by several doctors to have surgery and get on a CPAP machine at night. But a lot of people don't realize that you were just mentioning that your first two vertebrae are behind your mouth. And that's where your brainstem is, which is controlling so much in our body, like a master controller. So if this is not operating functionally, how much it really affects the most important systems of our entire body.
That's right. If your intraoral musculature isn't helping you stabilize C1 and C2, then that is going to have a negative effect on your brainstem, which means you're going to struggle with things like your nervous system and nervous system dysregulation, so emotional stuff. You're going to struggle with your executive function, like quite literally, are you able to perform high-level thinking? Things like feeling like foggy brain or fuzzy brain, things like that. So it will be more difficult for you to learn and retain information, memory, right? If if these things are out of order. And when these things are out of order, it is the precursor to sleep apnea. Now, not all of us get there, and some of us are just fortunate in that we can have this sort of semi-disordered structure within our cranium and not end up with sleep apnea. But if you are a mouth breather, that tends to be the path.
And the other thing I want to tie into this conversation before we wrap up is how closely related the pelvis and the cranium are. A lot of people, when they have their problems, they go to their specialist. The specialist only addresses the area.
Yeah.
It's just how the medical field is. Sometimes the person that is in that profession also is aware of that, and they're just kind of chained to, what they're allowed to do. But in neurosomatic therapy, we're so lucky we get to look at the whole picture. So sometimes you cannot make change in the cranium unless you address the pelvis, and that's a huge thing. And this is the beginnings of craniosacral therapy.
Yes.
Right. And we've learned a lot of the same movements that craniosacral therapists do.
Yeah. I mean, a classic example is when someone has an overly flexed pelvis, then they tend to have a forward head posture, right? So overly flexed pelvis would mean like, if your booty's sticking out a whole bunch, you've kind of got that popped look. But if there's that amount of flexion in the pelvis, a very classic reaction to that, postural alignment reaction to that, is that the head will come forward, and sort of look like that look that you get when you're staring at a screen for too long, right? And so just that will play out negatively in your cranium. You'll be overusing, some of your suboccipital muscles. You'll be overusing some of your anterior neck muscles, pulling you forward, and so on and so forth. So, for our purposes, and we've been pelvis obsessed from the very beginning, right? We would make sure that we go into the pelvis as we're working on, pulling someone's head backward into an ideal aligned position, even if the primary concern is like mouth breathing or sleep apnea or any of the craniofacial related ailments that somebody might be running into. Trigeminal neuralgia is another one. I have a client who I've been working with. I think I've seen him 4 times. And he was struggling with horrendous trigeminal neuralgia on his right side. And that was post a lumbar surgery.
Oh, interesting. So the trigeminal nerve is one of the 12 cranial nerves.
Yep.
And the neuralgia would come across the face, and they call it the suicide nerve because it is that uncomfortable.
It's that uncomfortable. So there is a surgery, a corrective surgery. It's rather beastly in my opinion. So I wouldn't encourage someone in that direction unless it were absolutely the last resort. For this person, he had issues with his lumbar. He ended up having a lumbar surgery between L5 and S1, right in that area. I think that's where the initial problem with L4, 5, S1, I think is what he said. And so he said to me that one of the very rare side effects of that surgery is trigeminal neuralgia. So I think within a few months of having had that surgery, this popped up. It had never been an issue, and then it was. This is also someone who has a history of being a multi-sport athlete, had gotten hit in the face many times by baseballs. I forget some of the other sports he played. Baseball was the biggest one. And so going back to that first topic of how our lived experiences as a younger person can then play out later in our life because those have created patterns or places of trauma. I think multiple things happened for this person, and it was just the perfect stack to end up with that trigeminal neuralgia. But within these 4 or 5 treatments, he's had instant success from our intraoral and intranasal work. And I've worked on his pelvis as well.
Of course.
because of the special relationship between the cranium and the pelvis. And each time I see him, it's gone away a little bit more and a little bit more, and it's gotten less and less and less loud. And we've been able to space out our treatments more and more. So, I mean, cranial work is so cranial and intracranial work is so important, not just for those that need the breath work, that need to switch from mouth breathing to nose breathing, or for those that have sleep apnea, but also for people that are facing other issues.
It's just this is why I love this work. I mean, it's just incredible how we can take concepts like as above, so below, and put it into practice in our bodies. And usually when we have an issue that's chronic that won't go away, we do have to look elsewhere. And so, using neurosomatic therapy and spiral theory and kind of movement intake of like, okay, where is there restriction to really see that the whole body operates in unit, in concert. And if there's a blockage, it might be far away from where the symptoms are. And this is why I love being an investigator of, okay, so this is happening. We need to look down many different paths through the connection of the cranium and pelvis, through the connection of C1 and L5, through the different diaphragms, right? So not only the respiratory diaphragm, but how it affects the diaphragm of the cranium. We have a couple diaphragms in the cranium and the diaphragm of our pelvis, our pelvic floor.
Absolutely.
And if these things aren't coordinated, how dysfunction can happen very quickly and how it can tumble down very quickly down a rabbit hole of like a downward spiral because our systems just aren't, it's like that exponential. And likewise, when we start to heal, it has that exponential effect in the positive. So all of a sudden, the forward head mouth breather that also had maybe some GI issues, that starts to clear up when you line the body up on the plumb line. Might have been an after effect you never even thought would be related. And that's where I just get so excited about the work we do.
Absolutely. And you don't even need perfection. You just need someone to be below their threshold for discomfort and pain and friction that would cause further issue.
Right.
Which I love that too. I think that sometimes we get caught up in being perfect, right? But I think that's something I've learned over the years too, is it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be below the threshold. It just has to be better.
And what is perfect anyways?
Perfect anyways? And when people see and feel and hear that they're progressing, that
reassurance,
mental encouragement, that mental emotional encouragement as well has a huge positive effect on someone's nervous system that also plays out positively in their body.
100%. Well, I think that's about time. I'm so excited that we do this interesting work, and I feel like it needs to be more well known that with the simple massage therapy license, you can do continuing education, and even with if you're a personal trainer, you can work with the eyes, you can work with the ears, you can work with the bite while you're working out to help align the structures of the cranium. It's just such an important area to breath, to everything that the brainstem organizes, which is literally our whole bodies. And we'll never, ever know in our lifetimes the intricacies and the interconnectedness of everything. We're striving to learn while we're here on this planet. And it's just fascinating. And I feel so lucky we get to do it. I feel so lucky that you're part of the team and that we keep exploring and that we bring other people into the team as well. I think before we close out, I just want to mention one of the people we're collaborating with here in St. Pete, Dr. McDonald. Do you want to just mention him? Yeah.
So, as we've gone further into this airway world, I've learned about airway orthodontia. So I had 90s orthodontia, which is they pull out teeth to make everything look aligned without actually encouraging growth within the maxilla and the mandible. And I totally could have had that done. I was a teenager, when I had braces, when I had teeth pulled and stuff like that. And unfortunately, having teeth pulled has multiple negative effects. They can lead to cavitations, which are holes in your maxilla and your mandible that can get filled with bacteria, which then circulates and creates other big health issues in your body. In Chinese medicine, and I'm not a Chinese medicine practitioner. I love Chinese medicine. It fascinates me. And I like to think about the principles to the best of my ability while I'm working on people. In Chinese medicine, each tooth is connected to a meridian line. So I believe there's 12 meridian lines, if I'm not mistaken. And those meridian lines pass through a tooth, through different muscular systems, through different organ systems. And so when you remove a tooth, you affect that whole meridian in a negative capacity. So modern day airway orthodontia focuses on expanding the actual maxilla and expanding the actual mandible so that you have room for all of your teeth, because all of them are important in overall systemic health and in airway health. We're just diving into that process, so I'll be able to comment on it more later, but we'll start with an expanding device. I believe it's called the Hyrax, and that will slowly help to broaden the palate and affect change in the length of the width of the mandible as well, so that eventually my son will have room for all of his adult teeth. And if he or someone like him needed, for example, a tongue tie release, he or someone would have the space in their mouth to accommodate that tongue. Because you can have a release without having the space and still run
like
into
another problem.
issues,
Yeah.
even though you technically have done the right thing.
Yeah.
So it can be a little tricky, but I'm learning more as we go, and it's just fascinating, and it really makes a difference in someone's life. Like now that my son is transitioning to being a nose breather, his executive function is a lot more on. His emotional regulation is much more in tune. So he's made huge improvements in some of the places where we as parents wanted to see improvement. And I think, as his own person, he knows that he's worked hard and he's seen some changes in himself too, and is proud of that.
That's great. That's a great ending to the story, and it's not ending. And we want to continue to provide this kind of information. So if anyone has more questions about that, we'd love to hear them and make connections for you. Connections like we made with Dr. McDonald. We're going to collaborate with him more in the future with body work while he does devices with the orthodontia. So I'm very excited for that. And thanks to you, you made the connection for us.
My pleasure.
And we'll just keep seeing hopefully more and more progress with your son and with our clients.
That's right.
And the work continues to evolve, and we're here to enjoy it.
Yes, we are. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our listeners, and we will catch you next time.